Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. And, we have been adding more information about sustainable living and particularly buying sustainably made products. And we have found throughout that research that Tentree, a maker of clothing, stands out as a leader in the fashion industry. Tentree makes a difference. They plant 10 trees for every item that's an article of clothing that they sell. Tentree has also already planted 56.3 million trees, and they're working to reduce the environmental impact of clothing production processes by using wood-based TENCEL fiber, hemp, organic cotton, and recycled polyester in its clothing. They've also reduced water usage compared to traditional clothing makers by as much as 75%. On the packaging front, Tentree plans to eliminate all single-use plastics by 2023. And we wanted to get them on to talk about how they're doing all this, because this is really a model for the rest of the economy. So we welcome Derrick Emsley. He's the CEO and brother of the company's co-founder, Kaylin Emsley. Welcome to the show, Derrick. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Mitch. I'm doing well. Excited to be here.
Well, look, it's really been impressive to see what you all have done as we do more and more research about the impact of different companies, different brands on the environment. Tell us about your goal of planting 1 billion trees by 2030. Are you on track?
We are. It's for us, the goal of 1 billion trees is really just kind of connects to why we started the business. Mm-hmm. We view ourselves as a tree planting company that happens to sell apparel, not an apparel company that plants trees. And so the idea of planting 1 billion trees was, when we started the business, this sort of crazy idea that we didn't really think was possible. But today, as the business continues to grow, as the impact continues to scale, it's becoming more and more real. And we believe it's something that we will be able to achieve by 2030.
Now, you're about 8-9 years old now, as I recall.
That's right.
You've done about 5% of your goal. How much do you have to grow in order to hit that 1 billion tree mark?
Basically, this year, we will plant roughly about 25 million trees. So when you put that into context, it took us about the first sort of 8-9 years to plant 50 million trees. This year alone, we're going to plant as much as half of that again. And so we're growing at a pretty exciting clip. And really, to get to that 1 billion tree mark in the next 10 years, we're going to have to grow by about 30 to 35% per year. But really, that probably ends up with us growing at a bit more accelerated pace in the next few years. And then, that growth probably getting a bit more reasonable in the years after.
So you also describe yourself as a tree planting company that happens to make clothing. Do you expect to expand into other product categories and therefore plant more trees by making more sustainably made goods?
The way that we think about who Tentree is and why we started the business was we wanted to connect consumers with tree planting. Mm-hmm. We understand that trees have this incredible impact on the environment. They have incredible impact on, the local communities that take part in the planting efforts. And for us, our goal was always to just connect people with tree planting, because, if we can do that, we'll inspire more people to, protect the planet and everything like that. But for us, the vehicle to do that, right now it's apparel. Right. But long term, it really could be whatever we choose for it to be.
That is a very ambitious statement. Now, let me dig into that a little more. How do you build in to the cost of your clothing planting 10 trees? Is this? I assume it's a factor in how you price everything, but you also have achieved some really remarkable economies of scale. You're planting 10 trees for one item of clothing that costs $30. Or $40. And by comparison, other companies promise to plant one tree maybe for every $50 or $100 somebody spends.
It So my background was in tree planting. When we started Tentree, when I was in high school, my brother and I started a tree planting company, and it was around this whole world of carbon offsets. And so we got connected with a pretty broad global network of reforestation organizations, and we got really plugged into the space, and we understood how to scale these projects, how to build reforestation projects. And we've partnered with some incredible organizations. And I think at the end of the day, when we think of what the future of sort of sustainable and restorative businesses is, it's about building these sort of cost structures, whether it be tree planting, whether it be plastic pollution, compostability, these different things, into the cost structure of the product, and then connecting with the consumer base that is willing to pay what call it that green sort of premium to do it. And so I think for us, fortunately, what we found is we make the most sustainable product we can, and we are able to plant 10 trees for every item that we sell. And the goal is to do that with an accessible price point. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, our customers, though, are choosing to pay more because it's responsibly made, because it's sustainable, and because it's planting 10 trees than they would if they were to go and buy from sort of some, whether it's fast fashion or a cheaper retailer.
And we did a little comparison, and you're probably 20% more expensive than a comparable Costco hoodie, for instance, is what we started looking at the comparisons. That's not a lot. And because you're so clearly committed to the sustainable and tree planting components of your business, I think it's very easy for people to accept that additional fee because they know that you're going to follow through. How do you audit and report back, or rather, I should say, how do your partners audit and report back what they've accomplished? And is that something that you're starting to build into the storytelling about the company?
Absolutely. One of the things that we did from day one was we always believed in connecting our consumers with the stories and the impact that their purchase was having. As we've grown and scaled, we've come to recognize that, for one, tree planting is really starting to, I'd say, grow in the global conversation around climate change. And you're seeing a lot more people talk about it with the Trillion Tree Pledge and the UN Decade of Restoration. We've always partnered incredibly closely with the groups that we work with. We travel to the sites, we understand the projects, we audit what's happening. Whether it's a not-for-profit that we sit on the board with, whether it's missionary groups, Peace Corps workers, university programs, and others, we partner incredibly closely. But what we've actually done, which I think is more innovative than how we approached it at the beginning, is that over the last few years, we've actually worked to develop a tool that's being implemented at 6 different projects across the globe in a pilot way to actually verify and audit the tree planting that's happening. So what it is it's basically a tool that's built on the blockchain. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it gathers on the ground data in these areas all across the globe, whether it's Madagascar, Senegal, Nepal, Haiti, and basically stitches that information together into forms and digitizes the tree planting that we're doing to allow our non-for-profit partners or different groups to actually allocate the trees, make sure that they're not being double counted. Mm-hmm. And then as well, it allows us to maintain sort of satellite imagery and ensure that not only are the trees getting planted, but the trees are also surviving down the line.
So let me ask the obvious question. Where do you plant trees?
So we plant all across the globe. And currently, we're partnered in probably about 10 ongoing projects. So today, we're planting in Madagascar, Senegal, Nepal, Haiti, Indonesia. We're doing some work in Canada, United States, Mexico, and a few others.
Now, from the beginning, you've been trying to change the trajectory of the fashion industry, which has a terrible environmental record. How do you think about designing clothes and choosing novel materials in order to keep the cost down while continuing to improve the overall environmental performance of the company?
When we started the business, we didn't know a thing about apparel. I remember, we were tree planters, and apparel was really just our vehicle to sell or to plant trees. And I remember us showing up to the first trade show, and we were showing up with neon, tank tops and this and that, and talking about spring and summer product, and everybody else was selling jackets because it was a fall trade show and we didn't know what we were doing. We've kind of, I think what that has given us is it's actually been sort of a bit of a secret weapon for us when it came to the fashion side of things, is that we didn't really know what we didn't know. And so we were able to, kind of push for things and partner with our, manufacturing partners in really interesting ways that, frankly, I think had we known more about the fashion industry, we would have known how hard it was to do those things, and we might have not done them. The way that our sustainability journey or evolution has kind of taken place on the fashion side is really, it started with partnering with the right factories. It was, ethical manufacturing. It was ensuring that they're RAP certified, OEKO-TEX, different certifications and things like that to make sure that, we're doing the right work and partnering with the right people. From there, the question then came, okay, if we're a tree planting brand that is using apparel as our vehicle, or that vehicle, the apparel, has to also be sustainable. And so we went through this full learning of just how destructive and polluting the apparel industry can actually be. And so the next step was overhauling our entire supply chain. And we did this over the course of, about a year and a half. And we had basically 8 significant margin hits because, we just realized, like, this is something we should have been doing from the start, and we just didn't know any better. But we basically transitioned every fiber in our supply chain to a preferred fiber. So if it was cotton, it's now organic or recycled cotton or fair trade cotton. If it was polyester, it's now recycled polyester. And then, where we are today is sort of thinking, what's the evolution of that? And, from a fiber perspective, it's continuing to source innovative and sort of, fibers that have less footprint, use less water, all these sorts of things. But the future is also about thinking about the circularity of that product. And that's really what we're focused on right now, is not just, is it the best fiber going into it, but is it the best fiber for the end of life? Is it compostable? Is it recyclable? What is the end of life consideration of this product? So that's really sort of the evolution of our sort of sustainability journey from a fashion perspective.
So that's interesting. You talk about the circularity, and of course, earlier you mentioned that your tree planting efforts provide work in these various regions. You also just mentioned fair trade cotton. So you're factoring in social investment as well as simply focusing on environmental, it sounds like.
Absolutely. I mean, we're partnering with some incredible manufacturing facilities that are doing amazing things in sort of the fair trade realm, in fair wear, a handful of other sort of certifications in that same realm, but the tree planting side of things as well. And this is, I think, what a lot of people don't necessarily recognize, is that tree planting isn't just about helping the environment. Tree planting is also about creating jobs, providing food security, poverty alleviation, all these sorts of things. When we've traveled to our Madagascar site, which is one of our longest partnered sites, about 4 times in the last, call it 7 years. And each time we've seen the evolution of the areas where we're planting, both from an environmental standpoint, but also from a social and sort of community standpoint. When we started planting there, it was the village that we were partnered with was roughly 160 people. And the individuals were in incredible poverty, and ultimately were in pretty sort of destitute situation, because it was a fishing community, and they cut down the mangrove trees to make room for charcoal, for farming production, or for, tragically, sort of food and shelter. And what had happened was that the fish that used these mangrove channels for, as fish spawning areas, and that had started to leave. Right. And so as a result, the individuals in these communities fell into more and more impoverished situations. And so today, one of the most exciting parts about this is that we've planted over 15, 16 million mangroves in that estuary, that channel alone. And we've employed as many as 200 to 250 individuals every day doing that. And that village of 160 is now over 1,000. Wow. We've sent them freshwater well drilling systems. We purchased and supported with getting new boats, maternity centers, things like that. And the best part of all this is that today that village where we're employing as many as 250 people, a lot of those villagers are actually starting to go back to fishing, because the fishing's returned. And, frankly, tree planting's not the easiest work.
It's backbreaking labor.
Yeah. And so they're going back to fishing. And so, ultimately for us, it's tree planting isn't in that old adage of, giving a fish or teaching somebody to fish. Mm-hmm. Tree planting is absolutely teaching somebody to fish.
I planted trees in high school as well. So now one of the other things that was really cool about your site is that in addition to offering the 10 trees planted with each item, you offer packages to help people offset their carbon footprint. And, based on the story you just told, it's also a way to help people around the world rise out of poverty. Tell me about how people are using those packages. Are they augmenting their purchases with additional tree purchases on an ongoing basis? What does that look like?
So they are. And when we think of how those packages kind of came to life, it was a few things. One was COVID had just hit, and supply chains across the globe were getting pretty heavily disrupted, and we weren't sure if we were going to have the product to sell. And so we started thinking of how can we get creative. But the other consideration was our belief has also always been in creating sort of a fun educational environment around sustainability, not being sort of the brand that's pointing its finger at you and telling you what you're not doing, but helping you on that journey. And so the idea behind these, we called them Climate Plus packages, was to educate you on sort of the impact of some of the things that you do in your regular day-to-day life, whether it be sort of, your Amazon subscription or, long showers, Netflix subscription, binges, all those sorts of things. And then offer you a fun, interactive way to offset that footprint. And so for us, what we're seeing is actually, we've seen a really phenomenal uptake with these. And, we're seeing a lot of people add them to their cart. So to your point, supplementing, like they're buying a t-shirt that plants 10 trees, but they're also buying a package that plants another 10 or 20. And we're seeing a lot of people share them across their social media channels and talk about sort of, the fun impact that they had through this.
So do you find that people are even coming to Tentree first to plant trees and then later they discover and purchase their clothing products?
It's definitely a bit of both. And we have a lot of people that actually buy the product not fully knowing that we plant 10 trees. And then we have people that come to plant trees and they come because they believe in the mission, and that's what leads them to purchase a product, whether that's a Climate Plus package or a piece of apparel. Mm-hmm. I think what we've found is that, and I think this rings true for virtually all sort of organizations or companies that sort of live in this, give back space, this sustainability space, is that just doing good you can't sacrifice having a good product for doing good. The brand, the mission can sell the product, but the product also has to sell the mission. And so, for us, it's about creating incredible product, durable, sustainable, trendy product that does good. And whether you come in for the mission or for the product, we're going to plant those trees.
Now, as you said, your site offers a lot of great ideas for lowering your carbon footprint at home. How does Tentree help employees cut their footprint when they're working, whether they're working at the office or at home these days?
For one, when we launched the Climate Plus packages, we launched them by sort of offering all of our team to basically pick their package, and we basically did like a big event at the office to announce it. What we've done more recently is we've actually gone on to offset our entire scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions as a business.
Really?
So we are effectively 100% carbon neutral as of 2020. And, to do that, we did a full life cycle analysis. We measured our sustainability footprint. We worked to reduce it as much as we can. But at the end of the day, we still create product. And so we're still going to have a footprint. And so included in sort of the scope 1 emissions of that is our employees commuting. And while that footprint's certainly gone down a lot with COVID, there's a lot of people who are working from home. We're still offsetting the entire footprint of our employees commuting and everything like that.
So as you think about how we come back to something approximating normal, and normal is always different, how do you see the hybrid workplace as a potential part of Tentree's solution to lowering its environmental impact even more?
I think it starts with what I just said about carbon neutrality. This is a commitment we've made as a business. And so what that effectively does is, for us, it creates a financial incentive to choose to find ways to reduce our footprint as a business. Mm-hmm. So, when you think of, to your question of like, how does a remote working environment, lean into our sustainability considerations and things like that? Ultimately now, for every decision we make as a business that isn't perfectly aligned with our values of reducing our footprint, we're going to have to think about purchasing offsets to account for that. Now, that's not, there's issues with that sentiment. It's not a perfect system. But I think for us, when you think of our team and what COVID has brought, it's one that we've recognized that we don't have to have everybody in the office every day. We're doing a lot more digitally. We've been hiring team members that are working remote and will be remote for the future. The big challenge is going to be, how do we maintain culture through this, and how do we kind of continue to drive innovation when we're not necessarily in the same room together? So I think the answer is it'll probably land somewhere in the middle. We're not going to go back to 100% in the office all the time, but we're also going to try to need to find those opportunities to create these like creative collisions with our team to still create innovation.
That's fascinating. I mean, the idea that even though you are reducing the in-office, you're still thinking about offsetting the out-of-office contributions people are making. That's very forward-looking. So let me pivot back to the clothing for a moment, and I'll just tell you right off the bat, I wish you would get the Lorax hoodies back in stock, because I'd like to get them.
Well, so stay tuned. Right? We are there. We're going to have a new capsule around that with some exciting new product coming back later this year.
Well, Dr. Seuss's Lorax is a winner, and I want one. But so let me ask this question. How does fashion and storytelling come together to reshape people's expectations generally? I mean, do you think that you can reshape the fashion industry and other industries with this kind of an experience?
Absolutely. I think I've always believed in the power of consumers in the broader conversation around sustainability. I think when you think of government, when you think of businesses and the role that they have to play in the broader environmental conversation, what is driving them to make the tough decisions, I really believe are, you and I, it's, the listeners here, it's consumers, and it's, you're voting, whether it be really with the ballot or you're voting with the dollars that you spend. And I really believe that fashion is one of those areas that holds some pretty meaningful cultural resonance. It's, fashion, music, arts, different things like that. And I really, though, believe is that this is just the beginning. This is just one of the channels that people are starting to think more critically about how they're spending their money. And really, it comes down to every day voting with your wallet and, picking the solutions that are, better for the planet, better for, the workers across the globe, things like that. Because the more that we do that in our day-to-day lives, the more that it pushes every business to make those tough decisions faster.
Derrick, that's I think a great place to end. But let me ask one last question. Folks might be visiting Tentree.com. What are your favorite items coming out, and why are they more sustainable and a better choice in your opinion?
So I personally love our Tree Blend t-shirt, and our Tree Blend is kind of an example of that transition that we went from when we evolved our entire supply chain to sustainable. It's made with TENCEL, recycled polyester from plastic water bottles, and organic cotton. And it's, the softest sort of fabric I've ever felt. The other thing that I love is our destination pants. They're, to me, they're an under $100 pant that's super sustainable and feels like, sort of a $130 technical pant. And then the last one, which is probably the easiest answer, is just our sweatpants. Our sweatpants are fantastic.
And the perfect item for our times. Well, Derrick, I want to thank you very much for joining us today on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Really appreciate you having me.
Well, folks, that was Derrick Emsley. He's the CEO of Tentree. And of course, you can find Tentree at www.tentree.com. Go online and check them out. And while you're there, why don't you pick up a couple of trees? Because the Lorax is waiting for us to make a difference. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. But in the meantime, let's all take care of one another, take care of ourselves, and let's take care of this beautiful planet that we live on. This is Earth911, and we will be back soon.